So Kaiser, or otherwise known as Elaine Lo Po Bia, she is an antagonist that SIU introduced in the Name Hunt Station arc, and quickly grew into one of my favourite characters in all of TOG. But why is that? Well, her narrative arc, to me, is about as clean as you can get in terms of formulating a succinct, empathetic, thematically relevant, and rewarding antagonist to protagonist transformation. Starting off as a promising princess of Jihad candidate from the Grey Wolf branch family, her fighting aptitude and natural beauty allowed her to overtake others despite not being a direct line descendant. For that, she was granted a special role and treated like royalty while oblivious to the responsibility she had as an upcoming princess. Kaiser describes it as immaturely dancing on a glass ceiling, unaware of those less fortunate watching from below. She assumed her family's affection was completely genuine, but it'd be more accurate to say she was receiving this treatment because her status elevated the influence of the Grey Wolf branch. Being a princess carries a lot of weight in the tower, and parents place a lot of pressure on young girls to be nominated for this role, but there is a known stipulation to carrying this title, which is remaining an innocent and untouched glass shoe in Jihad's cabinet. In other words, not falling in love or having intimate relations. Unfortunately, during a competition, she did exactly that, failing a test set up by the Lo Po Bia family head and sentencing her branch to imprisonment. She was forced to pay off this bailout debt by climbing the tower and stopping at the Name Hunt Station, where she'd become the de facto ruler of a pyramid slave debt scheme. Over 1,000 years later, Bam and crew arrive to steal her name in order to fulfill Yuri's condition and regain Endorsi's reputation after losing a bullheadish challenge with Kaiser. That is, the name that Elaine had taken, slowly growing apathetic and calculating over the years, all in the misguided hopes of paying off her debt, being reinstated to the family, and upholding the responsibilities she believes she had failed to. This is symbolized none more so than her mask and her heels. The former represents her abandonment of her self-identity, reveling in the belief that being the family's unquestioning, maiden-like puppet showcases a sense of maturity that would win back her loved ones. Hiding your true intent and voice behind a mask in the most literal sense. The latter is centered on a vision of her youth, spent dancing with those very shoes, clinging desperately to those days. But despite her best efforts, her family did not share this level of respect for their daughter, spending her money on frivolous expenses for her supposed traitory. She understood this deep down, but this vague dream of a better life helped her to maintain conviction in heinously stealing regulars' names time and time again. What it took to break this glass ceiling was Bam emphasizing with her struggles and questioning the ingrained beliefs she continued to hold on to. The entire arc is all about names and their value to identity, among other themes, so it is truly telling that after 1,000 years, Elaine recalls the names of all of her family members, but cannot remember her own name anymore. Once she agrees to enter the auction arena, she removes her heels and mask, embracing a new version of her identity. At one point in time, she'd been hidden away as the Stain of the Grey Wolf branch, later maintaining this secret role as a form of self-protection and to recompense for her supposed deeds. But now she is coming out into the light, revealing herself to the unforgiving world that stabbed her in the back for being a relatively normal teenager. To get into a little more detail about why I love this character arc, specifically within the greater storyline, I guess firstly it proves incredibly relevant to Endorsi, another princess of Jihad, except not a failed candidate. A primary concern of her character is the restrictions placed on princesses and how this affects the potential for relations with someone like Bam. Elaine draws a sharp contrast, presenting the reader with a display of what can happen to you and your family when you don't obey Jihad's overly restrictive rules and regulations. Furthermore, it highlights why Bam is the perfect person to finally tear down Endorsi's princess mantle and reduce her to the normal person she is already becoming. Secondly, Elaine's arc perfectly fits into discussions around how the 10 Great Families exert their control over regulars in schemes like the Name Hunt Station auction. They do not care about the suffering of those they exploit, as long as it allows them to maintain their wealth, influence, and manpower. Elaine is an unfortunate victim of this, but also an example of how these systems can still persist in pockets of opportunistic lawlessness. Lastly, it should be obvious from my coverage of her arc, but I absolutely adore the way SIU interweaves the themes of identity and power with names. If I had to pick one story arc that perfectly delivers on the themes it's trying to convey, Name Hunt Station would probably be my number one. To me, it was just so clever and ironic to discover that Elaine of all people had forgotten her own name after years of stealing others. It sheds a light on the falsehood she believed, such as returning to the family and resuming its responsibilities. How could she possibly do this if she doesn't even know her own name? As you can probably tell, Elaine Lo Po Bia is one of my personal favourite characters, which really makes me frustrated and disheartened to address what I'm going to talk about next. The real meat of this video, even if the word count might be less. That is the beta problem. What is that, you might ask? Well, it is a writing problem SIU has constantly run into since around the start of Season 2. In essence, an interesting character, usually an antagonist, is introduced in a specific story arc, and we become attached to him or her over their gradual growth. And then, at the end of the arc, SIU decides to add this character to BAM's motley crew. So what exactly is the problem then? Because it seems like we've just got a new character to follow through the story, right? Well, yes and no. See, the issue is that these characters should, for all intents and purposes, have just remained arc-specific characters. Ones we learn about in the arc they preside over, but once finished, go their separate ways from our friendship-collecting protagonist. This is because these characters are, without exception, pushed into the background, underutilized until they become just another side character of BAM's various groups. SIU has a bad habit of factoring in the popularity of certain new characters and deciding to keep them around when it is totally unnecessary. Which brings me to Beta. Now, ironically, I don't find his character all that interesting, but I know a lot of other fans do. He was one of the first notable examples of SIU perceiving the popularity of an arc-specific character and expanding their role into BAM's team without really giving thought to how best to incorporate them. And now he is just forever stuck in Kun's lighthouse because SIU is just waiting until he can pop him out again for some little character moment. Which is exactly the problem. Why keep a character around if you're not going to use them in any meaningful way? What's their purpose? Maybe he'll become relevant again when some big mystery is revealed, but why not just write him out of BAM's group until that time? If SIU can write convenient ways to keep him there and show him interacting with the group in really minor ways, he can also write ways of removing him after his arc was complete. The point is that keeping people like Beta in the story and utilizing them in boring, minor ways diminishes the value and intrigue of their character until they become almost forgettable. SIU's focus has always been more on a select few characters, and it shows in the ways you see people forgetting Beta even existed in more recent chapters. When you have several large groups of characters, but only a small fraction of them are consistently relevant or interesting, you have a problem. You're also left seeing BAM as this friendship collecting protagonist, almost like a Pokemon trainer with Pokemon only being pulled out for very specific moments. It just makes no sense, whereas at least reintroducing characters can be exciting and you're not left questioning their impact in the series. That's obviously not to say I don't have problems with characters being underexplored in general, but I'll touch on that in a second. So Elaine is an unfortunate casualty of this writing flaw. She was a fully fleshed out character that I had naively hoped SIU wouldn't sideline, and now she's just one of BAM's friends, trapped on Ginseng Ha's ship till SAU sees fit to give her some relevance again. We get a couple panels here and there, but I often find myself questioning why SAU bothers to show her at all. To remind us of this really cool character that he proceeded to throw in the background? Now I'm sure some people in the comments will rightly bring up that Elaine could play a pivotal role in the Lo Po Bia centered story arc we are currently in. After all, finding closure by confronting members of her long-lost branch family might be a decent way to write a neat epilogue into her character arc. I would honestly dig that. But as stated with Beta, there is no reason to keep her around doing nothing of note when SAU could have easily just written her out of the story until it was time to bring her back in, like Akarang or Yu Han-sung. If she was so intrigued by Bam and absolutely needed to follow him, why is it that she rarely talks with him anymore except for in group conversations? Ginseng could have easily kept her someplace hidden and there'd be no difference. Hell, the biggest moment she has gotten since that arc ages ago is destroying a bomb switch for an irrelevant side villain in the Last Station arc. So it's painfully clear that SAU does not know what to do with her. And I think it's worth briefly mentioning that this is not even diving into how many characters that once appeared important to the story or the world are now somewhat irrelevant, like Ren and Jihad's Secret Service unit for instance. You'd think a group of agents like that would have been involved in the 3 orders Jihad gave out, but nothing has happened so far. I think a common defense of this is that SAU tends to weave plot and character threads in an excruciatingly slow manner, which is totally understandable, but also, how slow is too slow? When does it hit the point that we need an update on specific characters? So yeah, this is a pretty pervasive, multifaceted problem, and one I don't think will go away with the ever-expanding cast of TOG. I truly hope some of these characters are made relevant again, but the problem is still, why were they sticking around in the first place? Thanks for watching, and if you want some random occasional TOG discussion videos and AMVs, then feel free to subscribe to my channel. See you next time!